and going hell against them. I suppose that was quite an easy one in a sense, I suppose, being against the bad guys in Greece. It got a bit harder later on.
People forget, you know, when they remember the 60s, they think about Vietnam, of course, and Czechoslovakia, and Cuba, and Mozambique, and the rest of it. And of course, the famous events in Paris. But what they forget, well, maybe they don't. I'm sure there's some people here who don't, but that in 1967, as the 60s were really getting underway, a military coup in Greece that brought to what we always called the cradle of democracy, this regime of steel helmets and dark glasses and sadists and torturers was an unbelievable thing. I mean, here's a NATO country in what our bosses are calling the free world, and it's given up without protest to this gang of thugs, which was still in power when my mother's body was found there. And I can't see the audience properly because of the lights, but who here has seen the film Zed, sometimes called Z, by Costa Gavras? Not bad. The best political thriller ever made on screen, about the murder of Grigory Lambrakis, a famous Greek oppositionist. And the coroner who I had to see in my mother's case was the same man who had said that Lambrakis had been killed by hitting his head on the pavement and not by the truncheon from a secret policeman in the pay of the Greek royal family, who had, in fact, it was later found, killed him. So I was in this surreal world of pursuing a murder investigation that became a suicide inquest with the guy who was the chief, so to say, necropolitan spokesman for this filthy regime. So it was a very intense week, yeah. And taught me something that I already knew, which is that it's very hard to have a non-political private life. It's a funny thing. You may wish you could. I wish everyone could have. I'm a great respecter of the private life. I hate totalitarianism and theocracy because it claims to take over the private life, but try as you may to lead it, you will keep on finding that politics invades it. And you may as well know that is going to happen to you.
I mean, one thing that's clear is your parents' sort of acceptance becomes the template for your resistance, if you like. So you find that other people perhaps are prepared to accept, don't care too much about the Greek colonels, don't care too much about what's going on in Northern Ireland, or don't care at all about what's going in Argentina. And your boom, boom, boom sort of determination to make sure that people do care. And that is the theme of this thing, of choosing a side and just making sure everybody else knows about it.
Well, that's very generous, Peter, but, and thank you, but before we leave the parents, well, we don't have to if you don't want to.
It seems to be that it's against that acceptance.
Here's the thing, neither of them had the same politics as I did, really at all. My mother was more liberal than my father, but not by that much, or not in the terms I was using anyway. But what I found was, when I fulfilled all their expectations by getting to Oxford and getting to Balliol at that, which is the one I'd set out to do, which, in case you don't know, is the College of Effortless Superiority.
Until the University Challenge.
Till by representing it on University Challenge, I dealt that reputation a blow from which it has still not recovered. And then disappointed them by spending all my time at Oxford not going in that dinner jacket to fashionable and classy events, but getting roughed up by the police and so forth. For all that, they both thought that at least I was doing it on principle. And since all the things they'd done in their lives were done out of some kind of conviction, they thought, well, at least, even if it's the wrong thing, at least he's doing it for that reason. And that was a very touching tribute I had from both of them that I never expected to have. But though I now wonder, with the advantage of advancing years, whether I was seeking that kind of praise from them without realizing I was doing it.
It's a very touching, the pride that your father took in your press cuttings, even though they were so alien to what he wanted to say.
My father, who would say things like, what do you think what's going on in Northern Ireland? And I'd been in Ulster a lot, and I'd try and say this. He said, don't you think it's time for a good dose of martial law? As if British force had never been tried in Ireland before. He really was like that. I found out that he was later, quite by chance, that he was giving Christmas gift subscriptions to the New Statesman to his few remaining old sea dog naval friends, saying, I don't know if you ever see this magazine, my son occasionally writes an article. I was thunderstruck by that. And I used to wonder if, he also told me once he thought I'd been brave to go to Beirut to write a piece about the war there. That really amazed me, because he'd been on the Arctic convoys and all the rest of it. And I thought, well, maybe that's what I was looking for, yes.
Right.
A vertiginous thought.
The way the book then takes on a whole series of these conflicts that you've been involved in, and some of which most of your friends have agreed with you, and a lot of them people have seriously disagreed with you. Which do you think of all? Which is the hardest call? So this is one. Which was the? Is it always so clear who's right and who's wrong as it appears to be when you're writing about it?
Well, what I try and say is that everyone has to find this out for themselves, but whatever your political prejudice or allegiance may be, the critical thing is to be consistently anti-totalitarian. Now, that may sound very easy. Who's in favor of totalitarianism? No one says they are. But if you went to a meeting in favor of the African National Congress, for example, which I often did, I knew I was speaking on the same platform as several people who were members of the South African Communist Party, which was then the most pro-Moscow Communist Party in the world. I thought, okay, on this bit, I'm willing to fight alongside them and shoulder to shoulder with them, but we'll later have a big disagreement about Czechoslovakia. I'll make sure that we do. Partly to be true to myself, partly to test my arguments against theirs. Same with some of the people I identified with in Poland against the communist dictatorship. There, I knew that many of them were extreme right-wing. They wouldn't say it in public, but they were quite right-wing, often quite anti-Semitic nationalists. I say, well, okay, I'm with you about the Warsaw Pact, but we have a further fight coming. The whole joy of being a revolutionary is that the revolution is within the revolution. So the book, which, by the way, is available at fine bookstores everywhere, attempts to be true to that thought, that the struggle is never over, but that it's worth having for its own sake, win or lose. And, you asked me what the hardest one was.
Well, sometimes the price has been quite high, hasn't it? I mean, sometimes you've taken positions...
Well, the price is that you can yourself be accused of being a communist or a fascist, say, because of the company you keep. And this is a vulgar way of thinking, but people use it a lot, so that having been in favor of the overthrow of the Saddam Hussein regime for quite a long time, one can get accused of being, I don't know, Bush's poodle or some idiotic allegation like that. I guess since I've mentioned Iraq, I would say, and you asked me what was the hardest, that was the hardest. Something that seems self-evident to me, that Iraq should not be the private property of a psychopathic, aggressive, law-breaking crime family, wasn't as evident as I thought it was to everyone else. They all thought, no, this must be to do with some neocon Israeli lobby's sinister work. And I have a whole chapter about this, trying to set my part of the record straight, give some idea of what the regime change left actually did do and did think in Iraq and in Kurdistan as well as elsewhere, against the unbelievable tide of calumny and defamation that one had to endure for it. And there's a whole different risk being run, which is that you have to be boring about it. The one thing my mother told me I should never be. No, okay, I'll come back to this argument again and again. I'll be the last one standing. I'll dry you out. I'll bore you to tears. I know about this. I'm not going to have the historical record written by liars. And yeah, that was the toughest by far. But we won, and now Iraq is a free country. And everyone is terribly upset by it. Fantastically upset. They don't forgive the liberation of Iraq.
No,
their rightness matters so much to them.
But can the price ever be too high, even when you choose the right? Even when
you can't know that in advance. You can give a rough idea of what the price of having Iraq continually controlled by Saddam Hussein would have been. If you like, I'll give you an actual example that's partly mentioned in the book. During the period of the sanctions, the anti-war movement would come to me every week and say, "Don't you realize the sanctions are killing?" The figures varied, but it was up to 100,000 young people and old people in Iraq every year. I thought the figures were exaggerated, but not by much. I mean, they were doing that. So I'd say, right, I agree with you. This is a terrible